Greetings, everyone. Stan here, your cartoonist pal, with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and, role playing as a hobby in general. We are back again here with another live show. My guest tonight is Douglas Niles, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with over the years. Doug was one of the he was on staff at TSR from the he's going to tell us for sure the dates, but the early 80s until the early 90s. And he also, besides being a terrific game designer, is a celebrated novelist. He's spent a lot of his career doing not just D&D novels, but also branching out into military and alternate history fiction. So maybe we'll get a little bit of that in the conversation too. As you know, we're here. If you want to keep on top of everything that's going ahead of time, you can sign up for the newsletter. We've got a free newsletter, 50yearsinadungeon.substack.com, where I will announce ahead of time who the guests each week are. Also, you will be the first people to see the artwork that I produce. Each week while I'm doing the interview, I will begin to work on a new cartoon homage to one of the classic pieces of D&D art. I'm doing one piece from each year of the 50 years of D&D's history. We are up to 1993, I believe, this year. And you'll see in a little bit what I'm doing. I'll keep it a mystery for a second. So that goes on. You get that in the newsletter. You also you can have a paid version. I don't want to say like it's all free. It's 98% free. If you are a paid subscriber, you also get access to a process video for each of the drawings when they're done, so that you get to see the entire drawing kind of come to life in a 1 to 2 minute video before your very eyes. You also get a bonus discount on any of the merch we do for the show. Not a bad deal. And actually, free subscribers also get a bonus. Paid subscribers get a bigger bonus. That's capitalism, folks. All right, so enough of me blathering on about that. Let's get on to conversation with Doug Niles. So I'm going to see if I can hit the right button this time. And there we go. Douglas Niles has joined us. Hey, Doug, how's it going?
Good, Stan. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much. I know you are not someone that folks see very often on many interview shows or podcasts. So I feel like I've almost got a scoop.
Well, I hope I'm scoop worthy.
You are to me, my friend. You are to me. So, seeing as I gave only a loose background, give us the quick overview of your interaction with D&D, with the company, and just kind of the highlight top version, and then we'll get into the details.
Okay. Well, I started playing it as a hobby, as I think most people did. I had graduated from college in 1977 as a high school English and speech teacher, and I got a job in a small Wisconsin town. I'd never heard of D&D, but the summer after my first year of teaching, I was working with some college kids who were doing like a summer stock theater production, and they told me about this game that they'd heard about. And I had some background like with Avalon Hill games, and I liked Risk, and I liked a lot of those kind of strategy games. And I said, well, that sounds really cool. So as we got into the school year, I had a new class of sophomores. I taught all the sophomores a one semester speech class, and one of the students was named Heidi Gygax, and she gave me this permit one day. She said she should be excused the following day to be interviewed by People magazine. And here we are in this little small town in Wisconsin, cow country, and I'm like, okay, well, why are you being interviewed by People magazine? And she said, "Oh, my dad invented this game," and And I said, "What? I've heard of that." And so she did the interview. I think it was her dad was being interviewed, but she got to sit in. And then when she came back the day after the interview, she brought me a copy of that blue basic D&D basic set.
Oh, my favorite. My
And
favorite.
yeah, excuse me, it was really cool. I dove right into it. I'm pretty sure I got the game on a Wednesday, and by Friday night, I was ready to run my first little dungeon, the one that was in the box, and I had some of my friends. We were all mid to early 20s. Actually, we're not. None of I don't think any of us were even 25 at the point. And none of us had kids. Some were like I was married at the time. I still am, but I mean, my wife and I had just
Right.
gotten married, and some of our friends were single. But anyway, we all got together. And we had a campaign that ran quite a while, and I started it just from the basics in there, and we just really liked it, and so I started playing it as a dungeon master, and then I branched into, as I think a lot of DMs do, designing my own campaigns and drawing my
Right.
own maps. And one of the guys that had joined my campaign was a guy by the name of Gali Sanchez, who went to work for Dragon Magazine. I didn't really realize that the game was in. I lived in Delavan, Wisconsin, which is 15 minutes from Lake Geneva. So
Right.
he called me up to say, "Well, now he's working for Dragon Magazine," and he said this company is looking for game designers. Why don't you toss your head into the ring? So it's kind of on a whim. I figured that I'd be a teacher, for
Right.
my whole career, and retire with a pension and all that stuff. But
So
it was a hobby.
were you from Wisconsin to begin with, or was
Oh
that?
yes,
Yeah.
not from. I was from the Milwaukee suburb area, but
Right.
went to college at Oshkosh, and yeah. So I call myself a cheesehead for life. So I'll probably be here for the rest of my life. But
Um,
um,
so how did was first of all, hi Melanie, and John Ratliff is here. It
oh,
says that they moved me into Doug's old cube when I first arrived at TSR in October 1991.
that's right. I was on staff from 1982 to 1990.
So the I think it's hilarious that that Heidi was in your your class, and it's like that
Yeah.
it was the People magazine. So it wasn't for People magazine, you might never have gotten in.
I'm not sure I would have stumbled across the game just on my own. I wasn't actively looking for it.
Right.
I just heard about it and thought it sounded cool. And then there was the Dungeon Hobby Shop in Lake Geneva, which was a really cool game store. Which I don't think even though it's 15 minutes up the road, I don't think I'd ever been in there. So I started going. And Skip Williams was a teenager working there at the time, and
Right.
yeah, it was a revelation and a whole culture to get immersed in.
So were you into any sort of uh hobby gaming of the like a lot of people who came in I know that you since have done some designs for uh war game board game stuff. Did you do
Yeah,
any of that beforehand?
that was my only background in hobby gaming, was the Avalon Hill, like Luftwaffe in France 1940, and some of those hexagon map and pushing counter
Right.
board games I used to play with my brother when we were teenagers, when I was a high school student. And then when I went to college, that's when I first discovered Risk, and I became a real fan of Risk. I even took a world map one time and drew it with all my own interpretations, including like you could attack through Antarctica and stuff like that. And we had an epic game of it one day long in my house. I think that was when I was a senior in college, and that was still one of the most exciting games I'd ever played in my life. So I definitely enjoyed this strategy, the military strategy game aspect
Right.
of it. But I also had, I was a drama teacher, and I liked the role playing aspects
Yeah.
that the Dragons offered.
That's that's interesting. And I've talked to a bunch of people now. I know that I certainly came to it more from the narrative than the uh, board gaming side. I mean, I was aware of the military board games, of the minis and stuff, but I didn't
Yeah.
have anyone. didn't have anyone that I knew that was into that too. So I never really explored it very much. But when I heard about D&D, when I heard about this role playing side, the storytelling side, that's where I came from. But a lot of the folks I've talked to were, Jeff Grubb and Steve Winter. They were definitely into hobby gaming as a hobby when
Yeah.
D&D became another option that took over. You seem to straddle both sides of that very very neatly with the drama. Liking the risk and having done a little bit of homebrew for that, and
Yeah.
doing the drama and the role playing side as a teacher.
The storytelling is a really important part of it to me. Um, so the strategy did it. The strategy and tactics involved in combat essentially has always fascinated me. But I love being able to wrap a story around it. I see my brother Dirk has
Your
joined
brother
too. Though.
Dirk is checked in, and Steve Shend is here too.
Yeah.
All right, so and that blue book was the first uh, full game product that I ever got to. When I know I've told this story before, so I'll make it super quick. When I tried to get into D&D, when I heard about it, it was during the period that it was impossible to get any. Right?
Yeah.
I think it was during the no dice, so they were doing the chits uh,
Oh
version.
no, that's
So
right. I heard about that.
I the only thing I could find was it was 1979. And the only thing that I could find was this product called the official Dungeons and Dragons coloring album. It was a big, oversized adult coloring
Yeah.
album that had a board game in the middle that set the tone for what D&D was. And then that Christmas, I was able to get a copy of the blue book, and
Yeah.
oh, I ate that up. It's still one of my favorite versions of the game.
It really is. In fact, the the only game design I've done in the last few years has been to do a basic and expert game rules, going back to those. The expert game followed
Right,
they were
right.
higher levels of that simple game system, and I wrote this module for it and played it at a convention a couple times, and just now I'm working on a sequel to it. I ran it at GaryCon this year, so yeah,
Nice.
I'd like to go back to those roots.
Becky and Greg are here too. Hello, welcome. Join on. I know we have a bunch of other folks who are watching who are not chatting, which is a-okay, folks. But remember, if you do chat in, we'll try and answer any questions for you. All right. So before we go on, I'm going to pull up my little iPad here. I do all of my drawing. Folks sometimes ask. I do all my drawing on an iPad with the Procreate app and an Apple Pencil, and none of them are sponsored. There is no sponsorship on this show. I say those things because I use them, and I think they work really well. So I'm gonna switch over the view. So I'm gonna be doing an homage to this cover from the Book of Artifacts with a cover painting by Fred Fields.
Fred, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just Fred was one of we. There was an amazing stable of artists working in the office at TSR during the '80s. Larry Elmore, Clyde Caldwell, um, Fred. Um, of course, I'm leaving some of them out. Jeff Easley, but boy, those guys were good.
Yeah, yeah. I when I got there, I didn't get there till the mid '90s, and there were still a lot of. There was an amazing group then too, different amazing group. Where yes, Jeff was
Yeah,
still there, Fred was still
yeah,
there for a little while, um, but yeah, that just having all that talent in house and being able to just wander around and hang out with them again as someone who uh, um, I made my living then and for most of my career doing writing and design, but I've also been a cartoonist, so getting the
yeah.
chance to hang out with them was a real treat.
I think that had a lot to do with how Dragonlance took off so much. That because it was the original concept came from Tracy Hickman, but he involved the artists right away, and they, especially Elmore and Easley, um, they just really embraced the whole idea and just threw themselves into doing the incredible artwork that they ended up. In fact, these artists were doing paintings without having any products attached to them. They were simply
Right.
putting them out there and basically being used to convince the management to do a product line. And when they finally approved Dragonlance, they were a little bit reluctant. It was a 12 module series, was far beyond anything that the company had ever done before. But Tracy persevered, and he got together with Margaret Weiss. That we had a fairly small book department then. Margaret was an editor there. They did I think they were called the Endless Quest books, which were a variant of the choose your own adventure stories.
Right.
And um and but they were interested in putting a book series out for Dragonlance 2, which was also kind of a radical concept that TSR had never published any novels before that, and yet it ended up being a huge best-selling line for decades.
Yeah, it certainly is. So I had Tracy on a couple of months ago, and Jeff Grubb, uh, and, and who else? Someone else from the wow. See, I've done so many of these shows now that I don't remember. I can't immediately remember who I talked to. But yeah, a lot of people who have been involved, who were involved to uh, a good extent in that Dragonlance, uh, the first Dragonlance group, the development group, like you were. What were the first things you worked on when you got to TS?
Well, when I was hired, I spent about the first 4 or 5 months just familiarizing myself with the various game systems. Star Frontiers had just come out. I see
Mm,
Becky had run some Star Frontiers,
yeah,
so I learned that. Gangbusters was a new game. Boot Hill, so I knew D&D, but I spent some time getting familiar with the whole product line, and then I finally got a chance to write a module. It was first called The Cult of the Reptile God, which had been approved by Gary, and that was part of the deal at the time to do any D&D or AD&D products. That was an AD&D module. It had to be approved from the top, and there were very few of those ideas that were getting approved. But my boss gave me the assignment to write this adventure. They they ended up changing the name, I remember, because it was also there was some of the public relations issues with
yeah,
D&D to the forefront at the time. So they decided, let's be really clear, and we'll call this Against the Cult of the Reptile God
right.
instead of the Cult of the Reptile God, which it's the same story. But that was a fun thing to write. I still get compliments on it. It was one of the more complicated um, role playing adventures, because the first half is essentially a detective mission going into a village that has been half the villagers have been subverted by this cult, and the other half aren't, and you kind of have to figure out who's who, and learn. Then you learn that the cult is based out of this dungeon, and the second half is a dungeon crawl that you go in and wipe them out. And anyway, that was the first thing that I designed, the first product that ever came out with my name on it. And yeah, I'm still very proud of it. N1, it was I don't they had these various novel,
Right.
or I'm sorry, module designations, and that was for novices, because it was a first and second level character. Now I don't know that the N series ever went very far, but it was a nice opportunity.
It was interesting. Those numbered modules. I remember being in the '90s, getting into some conversations with the marketing teams. That the numbered modules had the benefit of telling you, making it easy to say if you did this, you want to follow on with that. But it also made it difficult in that if you didn't have N1, why would you buy N2? So the
Yeah,
salespeople
that's a
stop
good point.
doing those. So
And I don't. Yeah, N2 was not a sequel to N1. I know that there were the G1 and 2, and I don't know how many there were, but those were they always all featured giants. Um, One of the things actually that Tracy took and ran with it is that the game was called Dungeons and Dragons, but there were no modules that featured dragons before that.
Right. Oh, we had a funny conversation, and I'd heard this before, but I think both Tracy and Jeff, I think Tracy, Jeff, and Steve Sullivan all brought up the fact that while you guys were hatching the idea for Dragonlance, the company had hired some high-priced uh, consultants to come in and advise them on what to do, and the consultants really didn't understand the game at all. They really didn't understand it, but they did come away with basically what you said. Their advice was, well, you seem to have done a lot of things with your name is Dungeons and Dragons, and you seem to have done a lot of things with dungeons. We think you should do some things with dragons.
It makes
And
sense, yeah.
happened that Tracy and the group had been putting together something with dragons. Good timing.
Yeah. It was actually that grew out of an idea that our game design manager, Troy Denning, was doing that at the time. Came up with called the Blue Sky Project, where all of the game designers. And we had by that time we had about 10 game designers on staff. This would have been probably 83 or 84. Everybody was just to take a week or I mean a month or 6 weeks and just come up with some idea to pitch to the corporation as something that should be done. And we had one very very good game designer. We had Mark Akers did a game called Explorers, which was puzzle tiles that you kind of went out of a Europe, the basis of Europe, and you kind of went around and built the world with using these puzzle pieces and putting a map of the world together. That was a very interesting game. I know I did something involving airlines and trying to like connect hubs and stuff like that, and we really didn't have. It wasn't a great idea. Never saw the light. Most of ours did not see the light of day. But Tracy came up literally with this idea of doing 12 because there were 12 colors of dragons. The five chromatic dragons, the red, black, green, white, and blue, and then the five metallic dragons, and then the two on each side that were like well, Tiamat is he named
Right.
her, but it was the five-headed dragon that was in the monster manual, and so there was one based on each of those, and that was the germ for Dragonlance, and that's what got the artists painting their pictures. I remember Larry Elmore did an epic painting of an ice boat, like a Viking ship that was
Right.
on skates, and it had a white dragon coming down and attacking it. It was just a very very vibrant picture, and I think that art really helped to sell the product line to upper management.
Yeah, Jeff Grubb still has one of those. He's got the one with the flying castle in the background. With the
Oh yes.
yeah,
Oh man, that was Keith. That was the name I was forgetting. Keith Parkinson did that painting, which was just stunning. This
well,
is about the time
this one
of
was a
Star
Larry
Wars.
one. This was the Keith did one that actually went on a product somewhere.
Okay, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
uh,
right. It was
but Jeff has, let's say, one of the Larry's paintings from that pre uh, pre approval stage that you're talking.
okay. Yeah. Nice souvenir.
It is.
There, that,
A little jealous every
that was
time
right
I see
about
it.
the time that Star Wars was coming out, and I think there was some Star Wars spectacle involved in doing those floating castles. And I know I had a chance to write a short story once about the war, which is covered very briefly in the novels, and I based the whole story on the carrier warfare, naval carrier warfare in World War II, with the dragons being essentially the air groups, and the armies marching across the plains being the surface fleets, and it worked. It made a pretty good model with a lot of dramatic developments.
Dirk asks if did Doug share his origin story? Yeah, with Hyde Gygax needing to be
Yeah,
excused.
I started off with that, Dirk.
See,
I
that's
think at the
family
time,
keeping you
a unique
honest.
way to get into the game. Yeah,
All right, I just need to grab that and move it around a little.
nice. That's cool seeing this image come to life here.
It's you know what? It's part of the magic.
Yeah.
All right. So, what? How shortly after you joined did that Dragonlance thing start? There was a couple of years afterwards, right?
Yeah, we went through some growing pains. I was in the first month of '82. I was the 130th employee of the company in Lake Geneva. Was basically our offices were in this old um, old hotel. The dungeon hobby shop was on the game floor. I mean, on the ground floor, and then there were 2 stories of hotel rooms that had been converted into offices. But we had outgrown that, and they Dragon Magazine had a house in town, like a Victorian house. So all of the Dragon offices were out of there, and I think they started out mainly doing all of their production and packaging off site, but they did by the mid '80s. They were building a big building, but we had a pretty devastating layoff about 1984. That we had at that time we had 12 game designers, and we trimmed the staff back to 4 of us, which was pretty tough to take, and um, so we kind of I think that was, like I said, I think that was 84. In fact, one old friend of mine who just passed away, Jim Ward, was one of the people laid off. He'd been an original member of the company, and he used to refer to that date that would live in infamy, and that's why
Yeah.
I remember it was April of 1984. So well, he ended up coming back and having a pretty long career at the company. He was the manager of the game design and the editing department for quite a while, but. Yeah, so we went through those growing pains, but then moved into a much bigger building on the north side of Lake Geneva that had the artists had this glorious big studio with one wall was all glass windows, and it was just a nice, a really nice space to do the kind of work we were doing, and gradually kind of built things back up, and kept going with the writing. And I know that they had actually hired a novelist. I don't remember who he was, but he had some novel credits to his name to write the first Dragonlance novel. And I I don't know what the reason, but the company was not really satisfied with his work, and they just let him go. They didn't follow up on the contract. But Tracy and Margaret teamed up and started doing a really good job of pitching their ability to write the novels. And as you know, or as they say, the rest is
Right.
history. I mean, they
Right.
became one of the most famous fantasy novelist teams around. In the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they really took that and ran with it.
So I just one of the interesting things that has come up a couple of times, people talking about the old hotel Claire building, and so uh, Jeff Grubb and Steve Winter, who've both been on the show, uh, are in my. I'm still in a regular gaming room with them, and John Ratliff, who's in the chat
Oh yeah,
a little.
I remember John. Yes.
And a conversation that's been going on for the last 2 years is trying to remember who sat where in whose office and was where in the Hotel Claire, and it'll come up, and they'll put something together. And I tell you, one of the things they have loved about this show is Diesel's come in and filled in some of the empty spots. Uh, Steve
Yeah.
Sullivan, Jim Ward talked a little bit about it, and so I think that maybe apparently neither one of them is on right now, or they would be popping up about that. But I think what I need to do, maybe as a bonus of for this show, is have the Hotel Claire episode where I get all of you together and we put a
and try to
map.
figure out
We put a
all
map up on the screen, and we try and figure out who was where and
yeah,
all the
that would be
stories that
fun.
because everyone's got a story of someone falling through the ceiling. Everyone's got a
That'll
story of well, apparently it happened to more than one person. That's the best thing.
really help. I
So
didn't see it. I had
yeah,
heard that, and it was only his leg that came through the ceiling.
yeah. Oh, Jeff's here. Jeff Grubb is here, but he's having dinner. All right. Well,
Oh,
there you go, Jeff. You can tell me later what you think about my idea of having the Hotel Claire special.
yeah, Jeff joined. I think just a few months after me. We both were new hires in 1982. So was Tracy came in the summer of that year, and Zeb was already there, and Steve Winter was already there. But they expanded a lot in '82, and a lot of us hung around for a while.
Well, you know what? Turns out they pick good people.
I hope so.
Um,
Dude,
all right. So, what are some of the other products you think about from your early days? The first, we're going to split your career in two, your in-house career in two. The first half of your time at TSR.
well, a couple of products gave me the chance to combine my love of strategy games with my enjoyment of role playing games. For Star Frontiers, I did the sequel to the original Star Frontiers game, which was all role playing, and planetary adventures, or adventures in a location. And I got to design the spaceship rules for
Mm-hmm.
for Star Frontiers, which we ended up calling Nighthawks. And that was kind of cool. It did have a board game component with it, and various ships, hopefully cool ships that people could get control of, and obviously inspired by the Millennium Falcon um, and the X-wing fighters and stuff like that. And so that was a landmark in my career there. And then finally, they wanted for a long time to do a way to a lot of the D&D players had come into it as players of miniatures, chainmail.
Right.
Um, I think that might have even been Gary. I think it was Gary Gygax's
Yeah.
game,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so there was a strong interest in expanding D&D so that people could play miniatures battles using the D&D rules. And I got the assignment to write the game that eventually became Battle System.
Yep.
And you could basically take, if you'd have a group of characters, like obviously it's more large battle situation. So for example, you take the armor class and the hit points and the damage and things like that each character can do, and you convert it into a unit. So you could take a group of armored dwarves and have them fight a battle against a couple of giants that were much bigger and stronger, but the battle system allowed you to kind of balance that and use dice rolls. And you also would maneuver, if you had miniatures, you could maneuver them on a tabletop. The game included some counters you could use, but the ideal way to do it was with miniatures. And that was a pretty big jump forward for D&D, because it actually expanded in, kind of went back to its roots, and you were able to do these big battles with it.
Um, so for people that don't uh, weren't around and have never, it's that's one of those games that has kind of fallen off the discussion table. Not a lot of people talk about Battle System. Uh,
Yeah.
what was it? The kind of game? And again, I'm asking questions I know the answer to, but that's what interviewing's about. Uh, is that the kind of thing you would use in conjunction with D&D? Like, so you'd have your
Yeah.
players.
For example, the first battle system module I co-wrote with Michael Dobson, who had been an editor but also was really interested. He later would become manager of the design department. Um, we had the idea of taking the classic Kurosawa movie Seven Samurai, which also was the Magnificent Seven, the same
And many
story,
others. Yes.
and where you have a group of heroes, seven in particular, and then they're trying to rally a bunch of you know rabble, and um, and then so we wrote a whole elaborate adventure on it. And as a matter of fact, I've been over the courses I've been divested. We moved from a pretty big house to a much smaller house, so I had a lot of games that I had to sell, and then I sold them on the. There's a company in Madison, Wisconsin, Noble Knight Games, that I think is the largest reseller of used adventure games in the world. And they were a very, very good place for me to turn to with games that I didn't have room to store anymore. And the most money I got for a single product was for an unopened box of Bloodstone Pass, which was the name of our Magnificent Seven module. That was quite a revelation to me. That still seemed to be a demand for it, and there's no new product coming out in that vein, as you said.
Right. It's the kind of thing that when you hear about it, if it's in your wheelhouse, you want to try it out. But because there was so little of it made, it's uh, it's a weak market. Or if you're a seller, it's a strong market.
Yeah, right. We
Um,
ended. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Michael and I ended up doing a four module series. These were the highest level, highest character level modules that I think were ever published, at least back in my day. These were second edition AD&D, and they went all the way up to the fourth one, going into the depths of the underworld and confronting Orcus himself. And that was a pretty high level opponent for a Dungeons and Dragons adventure.
What was the name of that adventure?
That was They were all Bloodstone was in the title.
Oh,
The
okay.
Mines of Bloodstone, Bloodstone Pass was the first one, and I can't honestly remember, but I think the Mines of Bloodstone might have been the final one. And the character these were for characters that were in their 20s, levels 25 and up, and really almost immortal, but they were also facing incredibly powerful opponents. So that was a fairly popular series.
Um, you also during that time got into doing writing novels.
Yes, I
You you if I'm not mistaken, wrote the first three uh, Forgotten Realms novels, or
well,
the first one. Or,
I wrote the first one, um, the about the Isle, the Moonshae. Boy, what was it? Darkwalker on Moonshae. Was set on the Moonshae Isles. I'm not sure. I wrote a three novel trilogy, but I'm not sure that I finished that before. Like I think the second one was the Dris Bob. Oh, I'm drawing a blank on his
Salvatore.
Salvatore. Yeah, the
I,
Driz novel
I
might have
won't
been the
tell. I
second.
won't tell him you forgot
Thank
it.
you. um, yeah. So he also, and that was a fantastic novel too. So we were both. I know that I did the first one, but I don't think I did the first three. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But yeah, I did write. I ended up writing nine Forgotten Realms novels, including the Maztica trilogy, which was the one set in the kind of the magical realm based on Mesoamerican, Mexican, Aztec, Mayan, and Incan mythology, and then I switched to working on Dragonlance novels,
Right.
and ended up in a lot of Dragonlance. I think I probably half the novels I've written, about 50 novels, and I think about half of them are Dragonlance novels.
50 novels. Holy cats.
I was very
Holy cat.
prolific there. In the 90s, I was writing five novels every 2 years for a while. I can't come close to that anymore.
We'll build you back up to it.
That's
We'll get you there.
yeah, I'm on the downward slope of that.
So,
Oh,
how
Jeff
is
is
it?
answering. Throne of Bloodstone was the last of the Bloodstone Pass. Thanks, Jeff.
Uh, how is it that you got it to be the person that wrote the that first FR novel?
Well, when I was hired, I actually had I'd always been interested in writing as a hobby, but I never considered it as a career. And then when I started playing D&D, it literally inspired me to start spinning out a novel that I wrote on. In fact, my wife would have been about 1980. At the end of 1980, she gave me an electric typewriter for my birthday. I had this little mechanical one that I'd used for college, and I didn't do a lot of writing after college. But when I started to write this novel, I got this electric typewriter, which I
Mm-hmm.
only really used for one project. But I wrote a novel, and it wasn't a great novel, but it had some elements that worked. And when I applied for the job as a game designer, I was able to go in and drop a 400-page manuscript on the desk of the guy who was interviewing me, and it at least showed, I think, that I could string some thoughts together and be productive. I think that was a big part of it. And so that novel, they already had that novel, and it was not a Moonshade. I'd never heard of the Moonshays, but Ed Greenwood had agreed to sell the rights to the Forgotten Realms to TSR, which I think is kind of a funny story. I hope he wouldn't be embarrassed for me to say it, but he when TSR started asking him how much he wanted for it, his response was, "Well, I thought you already owned it," because
Yeah.
he'd been doing all of this stuff for Dragon Magazine. And but no, he had some people with consciences working for and they paid him a tidy sum for the rights to the Forgotten Realms. and and what the Moonshays, I had my novel was set in a kind of an Arthurian England or Great Britain setting, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to transfer it into something that we could use in the Forgotten Realms, and the Moonshays were kind of the closest thing to that. Ed's concept of the Moonshays, as he described it, was kind of like an Earth Sea, like the Ursula Le Guin
Right. Right.
Earth trilogy, and it wasn't very hard to convert it to a more of a Great Britain sort of mythology, Celtic, um, Irish sort of thing, and so that's what I did, and that was the story that I had originally created. I changed the names. We had some game designers from England too. The UK, TSR
Yes.
UK.
Okay.
They actually came over, and they were working with us, and we were collaborating on it. We were hoping to write this series of this novels trilogy called Silverfire, which didn't end up coming to be, but they were the ones who had come up with the monster Khazgaroth, which was key to the first module, and were gracious enough to let me use that for the novel. So it was a collaboration that took a basic novel that I had written, but it was close enough to being a completed novel that it was a lot easier than starting from scratch. So I think that's what gave me the leg up to getting it be the first Forgotten Realms novel. That was the first fantasy novel that TSR published. I think that came out even before Dragonlance, if I recall correctly.
So but before that, they'd been doing the choose your own. Well, can't call it choose your own. The
The
endless
Quest book.
quest. Endless quest.
Yeah, my first published book was a Tarzan Endless Quest book.
That's awesome.
I still, I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm going to go across my office here. I have Larry Elmore did a sketch for the cover of that book that I have.
Woo!
Let's see. Yeah, there.
D. Look at that.
I'm
Hold
trying
on.
to.
Me.
I'm not used to
Let me
doing
see
it.
if
Yeah.
I can switch around here. Hold on. I'm gonna do that. First of all, that's good. Yeah. Oh, little to the
Oh,
left.
why am I having such a, I'm not used to this at all.
that's,
Yeah, but
nice.
that's
Wow, that's a nice
an
thing to
elbow.
have on your wall.
Yeah, it's and that became it was that's not the original. That's not the final cover painting, but it was the one he did for the mock-up, and um, so that was the first published book that I did. Tarzan and I think it was called Tarzan and the Well of Slaves. And the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate was very strict about what you could do with Tarzan. I think that TSR had hopes of doing maybe a series of them, but that didn't work out. I don't think they did any more.
There have been there in the history of TSR and Wizards, there have been a number of licenses signed with that hope, and they very rarely pan out.
That's true.
I was when Wizards got the Harry Potter license, I I was I got the assignment to do. We were also beginning this process of trying to doing a ramp up for games. This was before um, YouTube and other the role playing renaissance that we've had in the last 10 years or so,
Yeah.
and so the brand team had come up with the idea that one of the problems that we had was D&D still seemed strange to parents if they hadn't grown up playing it. They didn't. They just it was weird and strange. And what is this game? We don't understand it. So they came up with this program of we're going to make games that teach role playing not just to kids but to their parents, and they can see that
Yeah.
it's a step up. So I designed the first product that was a Pokemon Junior game for six
Okay.
year olds and their parents, but we also had the Harry Potter license at the time, and they decided that one of the keys to doing this was to get back into doing endless quest books, right?
Oh,
As because parents would recognize that, and it would be a understandable step in this ladder up. And so
mhm.
I wrote a Harry Potter uh, endless quest choose your own adventure book
Really
that got
nice.
all the way done, all the way through editing, and then we found out that J.K. Rowling was not going to let that happen. So never seen the light. I still have a manuscript
Oh,
somewhere.
man.
It was
Oh, gee.
called Harry Potter Reads Between the Lines. Was going to be the title
Okay.
of it.
That's cool. I remember we got the Indiana Jones license
Yeah,
for excuse me, an Indiana Jones role playing game, and Zeb got to design that, and Lucasfilm had some ideas that they were
yeah,
about to put this over, and one of them that I remember was quite a conundrum in a role playing game design was, well, Indy can't die, so you basically had a character who was known to be invulnerable from the get go, which kind of changes the way you play him. So that was something that Zeb had to wrestle with. I
Let's-
remember he got to fly out to L.A. I think maybe with Tracy when the Temple of Doom came out. As everybody knew, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Indy was a huge property at the time. So we got TSR had the license, and Zeb was going to design the game, and I think Tracy was going to be involved in it. So they got to go out there, and they had to sign pledges up one side and down the other, saying that we will not tell you anything about what we see in this movie,
right.
and which they didn't, of course, but they were both pretty amazed by it, and they came back, and then sometime later, when the movie came out, the whole design staff took a pilgrimage up to Milwaukee to watch to see it in a matinee in a full size theater up there. I don't think Lake Geneva actually had a theater anymore at that point. And yeah, that was a fun ride, but it didn't turn out to be a great role playing game
So
process.
I have an interesting take on that in that I've had a chance to talk to you and several other people that were involved in doing it at TSR. Before I came to TSR, I was working at West End Games, and
Okay.
they wound up with the indie license, and so many of the things that Lucas had dropped on TSR as restrictions because uh, West End had been doing the Star Wars game and it had such success. Lucas now understood better uh, what a role playing game was. So they
Okay.
West End also had the indie license, and we got to do all kinds of things that you guys should have been allowed to do.
Interesting. I didn't realize that, but yeah, West End did some really remarkable. I remember some very cool military board games that came out of West End.
Yeah, yeah. They by the time I got there, they were no longer doing that. But that's certainly where they cut their teeth. They were still
Yeah.
all over the shelves of this is this great stuff we've produced. Junta is probably the biggest seller that they did.
Right. Right. Hmm.
Interestingly, one of the other things that they developed a plastic board for keeping the chits that I don't remember what game they built it for, but it was so popular that also became one of their best selling things. Everyone wanted more of those little trays to put in their
Oh yeah.
boxes for every other game that had a terrible tray that you couldn't organize the chits for.
Hmm.
So long after we West End was no longer doing any of uh, the board games themselves, they were still selling those trays.
Accessories. I, I see this. Um, S. Dun Dexter. The
S
pretty
S
anyway.
S
He
Dundister. Yeah,
yes, he played N1.
how about that?
Yeah, I think I guess he wasn't here when I was talking about it because I did a kind of
It's all your fault. His whole
yeah,
gaming career, it's all your fault.
yeah.
So you
That was
go ahead, go ahead.
if you can watch the replay of it. I kind of explained how that came about. That was the first product I ever wrote, but I'm really proud of it, and I enjoy hearing that people enjoyed it.
You brought up so we got let's do a little more and then we'll start to wrap up. I try and keep this a little over an hour, certainly under an hour and a half, as so I don't take up too much of your time, and so that we can let the rest of these people get on with their lives. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but we can always arrange to have you back to tell some other stories. But I'd like to, since you brought it up a little earlier, talk a little bit about Maztica.
Oh
Like,
yeah. Well, I've always been fascinated by the story of Cortez and the conquest of Mexico. As to me, it was like the closest thing to a real life Dungeons and Dragons story that I knew of in history, where you had these two incredibly different cultures clashing, and the technology, the military, I mean, the fact that the Spaniards had metal armor, that they had horses, that they had cannons, um, and the Aztecs basically had armies of tens of thousands of men, but their weapons were stone. They were wooden spears with stone tips and stone arrowheads on arrows. It was just such an incredible um, how do I say, just an
is that
incredible disparity
yeah
of abilities. But I mean, I think Cortez was pretty much a villain, one of the great villains of
right?
history. I'm not saying he was a heroic character, but he was certainly audacious, and the risks that he took, the sinking of his ships when they landed on the shore by Veracruz, and he was afraid his men were going to want to run away, so he had the ships just, I think they were burned. So it's like, well, we're here for the duration, fellas, and then to march on Mexico City with when he started out, he had less than 1,000 men and only about, I think, a couple dozen horses. It was again pretty audacious, and part of it is he bluffed Moctezuma in a way to the way that allowed him to be successful, and then they barely survived, but when they came back, they were reinforced, and the history was preordained that the city of Tenochtitlan always struck me as must have been one of the most amazing wonders of the world, and to think that it was basically blasted into smithereens by a block by block artillery uh, barrage as the Spaniards moved through the city, and it just basically left it barren was quite seemed like quite a tragedy. Although the Aztecs had some traits that made them a little bit frightening too. The level of human sacrifice that they practiced was beyond anything I think anybody else has done that I've heard of. So there's a lot of violence involved in that story, but um, a lot of drama and a lot of conflict and a lot of a lot of combat.
All right. So how did that? Uh, that so
Oh,
that's your interest
to,
in that.
to continue with the question, yeah. So I started to think of how could this be, translated into the D&D motif, and it turned that's the story that I wrote in the Meztica trilogy was essentially a very fictionalized and fantastic version of Cortez. The character Cordell was the character in my novel. He didn't have artillery, but he had wizards, and the Aztecs had magic too, but it wasn't as combat oriented and as lethal as the magic that the invaders were bringing into their world. And I just took a lot of inspiration from that story, and then went on to I think I tried to be more sympathetic to the natives than was often portrayed.
Yeah.
But yeah, my protagonist was a character who had actually been one of Cordell's soldiers, but was separated from the army and ended up kind of falling in with the natives, and also falling in love with one of the women who was pictured on that novel cover that Fred Fields painted.
Hmm.
So I thought it made a pretty good fantasy story. The climax was the feathered dragon, which was very inspired by the Quetzalcoatl, which was a lot of Mesoamerican cultures had believed in this creature that was powerfully magical, even perhaps godlike, that had feathers and a lot of magical power. And I basically used it as a dragon, but a different kind of dragon than anything that was on the other rest of the Forgotten Realms. Maztica was set in the world of the Forgotten Realms, but it was a new continent.
And how involved were you in the creating the game product to go along with it?
I wrote that. That was my game design. I did that as a freelancer after I was off. I resigned from the game staff in 1990. I, there was we had the president at the time was not Gary anymore, and she was her family was connected to the Buck Rogers license back from, I think her grandfather had written, or not, he didn't write it. He wasn't a creator. He was a distributor, an agent for Buck Rogers in the
Yes.
30s. And
Talk about the conquerors coming away with the goods. The Williams family wound up. They were publishers, and through
yes,
the what would now be considered pretty draconian, if you'll pardon the pun, contracting, wound up owning Buck Rogers.
yes. And so lo and behold, when the Williams controlled TSR bought the license to do Buck Rogers projects, which were in the game, as they were, assigning modules to the game designers, it was not a real desirable um, product to get assigned to. And Jim Ward, bless his heart, and I still respect him for this, was um, I had finagled a situation where I was able to do most of my work at home, and I
Mm.
think that was creating a problem for him. And so in the late 1989, he said, "Here's your schedule for 1990," and he had me writing 6 Buck Rogers modules, one after the other, all year long. And
Wow.
so I said, "So Jim, this is your way of telling me it's time for me to start my freelance career, isn't it?" He said, "Well, you got to do what you got to do." So we parted on good terms. I still did a lot of work for TSR through the 90s and into the aughts, but I was not a staff designer anymore after that, which had the advantage of that I could pick my projects instead of being assigned them. And so Maztica was one of the first big game projects that I got assigned as a freelancer, and it had, like, I think 3 big maps to it and several books, and it was a big box set.
So was that how closely was the decision to make a game product tied to the novels? Was it
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was. I don't think. I mean, obviously, without the novels, the game project wouldn't have even been considered. I don't recall pushing for it, but I think it was kind of the way things were done when there was a book series out, especially because we were a game company. They wanted a game product to support the book line, and so that was, and I was the natural one to design that because I had to design the world, and I had actually I'd done some research in Mexico. My wife and I took a pretty long trip down there and toured museums and some of the Chichen Itza and Uxmal sites in the Yucatan and in Mexico City. That so we did a lot of firsthand research on that culture, and so it was cool to be able to put that to put that to use in the game design.
um, so in the end, how many things did you do between the novels and the RPG products? How how much Meztica stuff?
As far as I know, there were just the 3 novels and then the 1 box set. I don't think there were any modules done for. There might have been an adventure in the box. It probably was an adventure in the box set, but I don't think there were any more products. I don't think it didn't seem to capture the imagination of the fans, because I mentioned to you before we went on the air that it seemed like people were more interested in castles and knights and dragons and and things like that. Northern European mythology rather than Mesoamerican. So it wasn't a particularly great commercial success.
Right. All right. So you went on to the freelance part of your career. Let's not leave that out entirely. What have you done beyond the realms of D&D? What's what?
Well, I'm really proud of two huge World War II war games I designed, ETO and PTO, that are massive. They're 2 full-size poster maps with more than 1,000 counters, and they're strategic level. They basically cover the whole theaters of Europe and the Pacific. And I got it, and I even got a chance to do a second edition of ETO, which fixed. That was the first big war game I ever did, and there were some issues that needed to be corrected. So I'm very very proud of that game.
So
And
again, for people who are not big wargaming buffs, ETO and PTO are European Theater of Operations and Pacific Theater of Operations. Yeah.
and I did a couple of. I got a chance to do games based on the Tom Clancy novels, Red Storm Rising and Hunt for Red October, which I took the inspiration from the old game of Stratego, where
Mm-hmm.
you have a stand-up piece where you can see what's on the piece and your opponent can't. But I'm use them. It was really, really tough to do with Hunt for Red October because that was what you're essentially doing is you're searching for something. But Red
Right.
Storm Rising is a battle game, uh, fictional, World War II land war in essentially Germany, and that Stratego format worked very well for that. I thought. Also, we used that same idea for A Line in the Sand, which I just was a developer on. I didn't design it, but it was about the time of Desert Storm,
Mm-hmm.
and they they really hurried up and got it out between the time that the army started to gather in Saudi Arabia. I think what that would have been late 1989, and then the Desert Storm was mainly in spring of 1990, and by then TSR had a board game out that was a military simulation of that operation. And then I also started doing, when I was a freelancer, I started doing some alternate history, again with my old co-writer and partner Michael Dobson. We wrote a novel called Fox on the Rhine, which is based on the premise that what if the July 20th, 1944 plot to kill Hitler had actually killed Hitler? How might history have been changed?
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote a novel based on that premise, which was pretty successful, and followed that up with a couple of other alternate history novels. And I wrote a series of fantasy novels for Ace that were not D&D related, but were um, definitely a fantasy realm, a world called the Watershed that I invented and made three, I think, pretty decent novels out of it.
Um, yes, I agree. I agree with you on that. All right, I'm gonna set this aside. Now, this is how far I've gotten during our conversation. I will, of course, finish this over the next few days, and as I said, people who subscribe to the newsletter will see it first, and then I'll post it probably the day of the next episode. I'll put it up for the rest of the world to see.
Oh,
Um, but not bad for an hour.
no,
um,
it was. Yeah, thanks for having me.
no, no, we're not
I've
we're
never
not
done a
completely done. I just want to be able to really focus on, instead of giving you three-quarters of my brain as I'm scribbling.
Okay.
Enjoy our last 10, 15 minutes together. The thing that got me doing this show is the fact that we're on the 50th anniversary of D&D, and a bunch of us are not involved with it directly anymore. But
Right.
we've a lot of our career went into it, and we still love the game. We still kind of watch what's going on.
Mhm.
So I've asked everyone else on this series just kind of say, we're at 50 years, which I don't know that I ever would have guessed that 50 years on, D&D would be even more popular than it's ever been, and that
Yeah.
I had a chance to have a little bit of that I helped to contribute to. You even more so. What is there anything you look at in this? Well, first of all, the fact that D&D has had this renaissance thanks to and thanks in large part to online gaming. Um,
Hmm.
what have you had any experience with you know younger folk who are surprised to find you did that?
Yeah, yeah. That's a always kind of a thrill to when that happens. I've had a chance to join a campaign that a friend is running online, so I've played a series of adventures with people that I never met face to face, but that was an interesting experience. I'm doing a little bit of design, very little. I mean, I wrote an adventure in 2018 that I did at that convention in Italy, and now this year I've written a sequel to it. I was able to play. It's basically for characters about levels 8 and 9 in the
Mm-hmm.
D&D expert rules, and I wrote this in the winter, and then played it for a couple sessions at GaryCon in Lake Geneva, and I'm going to be playing it at Gamehold Con in Madison later in fall this year. So I'm going to try to go to those two. They're very convenient for me, and
Right.
I don't really feel like I have any reason to go to Indianapolis for Gen Con or a huge convention anymore. But these that are local, they're a really good chance to see people that I've been friends with for 40 years now, and and enjoy playing the game. I don't think I'm ever going to get around to where I'm running a weekly game and things like that again. But it is fun to get into it. I've got my 9-year-old grandson is interested in trying it, and his mother, my daughter, used to play back in the day, and
Yeah.
so we're going to play this adventure. My wife also, so
All right.
it's kind of fun
Does
to re-experience it.
was your wife at all into gaming during the heyday when that was going on?
Well, she played a cleric always in my campaigns that I ran, and she did that from that very first Friday night when I
Right.
started. And in fact, she named the cleric Guida because that was in the heyday of Saturday Night Live, and there was a Guido Sarducci
Father
priest
Guido
character.
Sarducci. Yeah.
Yes, so and yeah, so and that was a long-lasting character. The funny thing about doing it as a hobby, that once I started writing game adventures as a job, I kind of it fizzled out as a hobby,
Yeah.
and
A lot of
so
people
my
have that.
own campaign didn't last too far into the mid '80s because I was doing it full time. But so she was I think she enjoyed it and she understood it, but she wasn't what you'd call a hardcore hobbyist.
Have you? You wrote these adventures for the Luca, the game fair that you were at in Italy, uh, and they were published in Italian. Have they been published in English at all?
Well, I don't think they will be. They're the fellow Amos Mons that paid for my trip over there in exchange for me writing this module. He owns the rights to it, and his the thing he does is that he always, I know Zeb did this, and Bill Slavisek,
Mm,
some other people that have worked for TSR. You write a module that he publishes in Italian and features it it's a limited edition, but he
right,
features it at the Luca convention. It's a very popular seller in every case, but I think it's a very specific purpose behind it. So I'd be surprised if maybe he does sell them in his
right.
hobby shop. He has a big game store in Milan. I understand he has. I haven't seen it, but
So, did you given any thought if you're going to write a follow up, which is not for him? Have you given any thought to doing indie publishing on that at all?
well, actually, it's going to turn out to be for him because he's collecting a lot of. I don't know about Zeb and Bill and other, but I think he said he was going to contact a lot of the guests he's had over the last decade, all the American guests, and ask each of us to write a short adventure. And he's going to publish again because of the 50th anniversary of D&D. He's publishing a commemoration
Huh?
with shorter. This is not the one I'm writing for him now is not a full size module, but more of a one shot deal, a game you could play in a single evening. And
Right.
I think he's doing this from several other of the game designers who he's had over there. And so I actually wouldn't want to try to publish it because I am getting paid a nominal fee, but I'm getting paid to write it for him. So
Right. Right.
I'm assuming he's
Okay.
going to own
Yeah.
it.
Just just curious. Got to ask the question.
This is actually the first paid um, game writing I've done in about 15 years.
Have you? Are you familiar with the live play, the live streaming play shows of YouTube D&D shows that are out there now?
No,
Oh wow!
they're
So one, so
live action,
the
or
hmm?
are the characters acting out or
Yes,
playing the game?
it's people playing the game and it recorded on video or sometimes streamed live for 4 or 5 or 8 hours at a time. But
Uh-huh.
no, that the big boom that D&D and role playing has had in the last 5 to 8 years has come on the backs of people doing these live play shows where now a lot of them are professional comedians or actors, and
Hmm.
so they've got a lot of entertainment value. But now there's a lot of people who are just
No. Yeah,
enthusiastic
no.
gamers, and to my mind, I've certainly had conversations about this on other episodes. To my mind, that's a big part of why we've got this boom, why D&D has become so popular so broadly, because we've always said, like, reading these 300-page books, they're really daunting. But if you get someone to
Yeah.
sit down and play, they get it like that, right? That's Gen
That's
Con and
interesting.
other
Yeah.
shows,
Well, that is the best way to learn the game is to
right?
join a game.
So
Um,
these now serve that purpose and
yeah,
their
I can see that.
entertainment, and that's allowed a whole broader slew of people who would never have walked into a game shop, or all they thought about of D&D was what was in the comedy skits. Now they
Right.
see it and they go, "Oh, that's fun.
Yeah,
I want to do that."
that's cool. Yeah. I have to look into some of that. That
Yeah.
could be quite entertaining.
All right. So before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to promote? I know you're.
I'm really not. I would say I'm 75% retired. I do have one more novel I would like to write. I've already started it. It's an alternate history about the Cuban Missile Crisis, that where things go worse than they went historically, and so if I can buckle down and start stringing pages and pages and pages together, I would hope to complete that in a year or two and maybe get it published somewhere. Yeah, that's kind of a dream of mine, and it would almost certainly be the last thing. I'm
Right.
going to be 70 at the end of this year, and I'm really liking the grandparent life, and
Yeah.
so
All right. Well, if you do, we'll get you back on to help promote it. In
okay.
the
Well, thanks,
meanwhile,
Dan.
folks, look, Douglas Niles' name's right there on the screen. Look him up. Look him up on Amazon. I'm sure the books, The Fox on the Rhine, and some of the others are still out there. Get
Even
something else.
the initial segment of the Cuban Missile Crisis book is published on Amazon as called Final Failure. I'm It's about a quarter of what I'd like the final novel to be. So I did that in the 50th anniversary in 2012 of the missile crisis, and yeah, so that's kind of again in the back of my mind.
So we'll tell go to Amazon, look up Douglas Niles' Final Failure, get the sales going for that. Maybe we can
That'd
help
be
push
cool.
the enthusiasm. Doug, hold on. I'm gonna take you off and make a goodbye, and then we can just
Sure.
have a friendly goodbye. But thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to get to chat with you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun to see these. I haven't been able to like read the comments that thoroughly, but it's really nice that people are actually commenting, and yeah.
Yeah, we've had a good 25, 30 people watching the whole time. Uh,
Well, cool.
so,
That's nice to know. All right. Well, thanks, Dan. Yeah,
all
I'll
right.
talk to you in a minute.
Thanks, Doug. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to come over to just me. Again, thank you to Doug Niles for being my guest this week and coming coming out of the shadows to the glare of public scrutiny. Hopefully, he won't regret that. Um, this show, of course, will still be available for replay. Right now, it's just on Facebook. Will be the only place you'll be able to reliably find it. But I'm working on getting the YouTube channel back up. Hopefully, some news on that next week, sometime in the next couple of weeks. Um, yeah, go to YouTube or go to Amazon and check out Douglas Niles. You'll really like his writing. I always have been a fan. I was lucky I got to co-write part of an anthology with Doug. He's a superb writer. Look for them in your used bookstore too. You can find some of the Maztica stuff or some of the Forgotten Realms stuff. That's it for this week. I'm again going to pull up my little link here for 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com, where you can sign up for a free newsletter to let you know what's going on in this show. Again, if you want to see that drawing finished up as quickly as possible, that's the place to go. If you want to see more of the cartoons and other things I draw, then coming to my Instagram.com/Stanex is the place to go. And if you really are digging all my stuff and you want to be part of the inside circle, well, maybe you want to consider joining my Patreon. Patreon.com/Stanex, where you get all of the stuff I draw will get delivered to you in email, and different levels you have other rewards, like I send around stickers a few times a year to people at some of the different levels, and holiday greetings. Just fun stuff for being part of my community. So I will be back tomorrow night doing another episode of Random Encounters, where I do improv cartooning. So that sounds like fun. Pop in and join that. Otherwise, I'll be back next week with another interview here in 50 Years in the Dungeon. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. Bye.